Sucrose might be the queen of elemental mastery, but can elemental mastery be good enough to push her onto the throne? We shall see. Hey, welcome back. Today we're gonna explore elemental mastery on Sucrose, who is the queen of EM. This was really highly requested on my channel by the comment for you guys, so I apologize it took me a while to figure this one out, but here you guys go. As always, let's get started by exploring their skill first. Sucrose E does 1 instant of Anemo damage scaling off her own stat, and does 2 instant of swirl damage scaling off her level and her elemental mastery. It does 2 instants because of the swirl and spread effect that we described last time in the Venti video. Moving on for Sucrose Elemental Bursts, each instant do Anemo damage and then the 2 swirl damage and finally a transformation damage. She does this a total of 3 instants across 6 seconds or 4 instants across 8 seconds if you have the constellation unlocked it. Now, I know a lot of you are trying to build Sucrose support, and most important, you want to know if the aspect of elemental mastery transfer on Sucrose is worth it. So that's what we're going to shift our focus to today instead. So Sucrose have 2 types of elemental mastery transfer. The first one is simply from a swirl reaction, which just increased corresponding element member by 50 elemental mastery. The second type is when she casts her E ability or her burst ability, and then it will transfer 20% of her elemental mastery to all your party member. And since you're gonna trigger a swirl reaction using your E or your ult anyway, so the 50 automatically apply as well there. Furthermore, since you can only trigger the elemental transfer whenever you cast a E or Q, we can also assume that some kind of damage is being dealt by the E or Q whenever a elemental transfer happens. So pretty much to properly understand the Sucrose damage is providing, we can factor in the following. When you cast a E on Sucrose, there will be an initial damage dealt by Sucrose itself. And then in the next 8 seconds, you will be able to provide elemental mastery to your teammate, who will be able to utilize that elemental mastery to do further increased damage on her elemental reaction. To illustrate this using an example, here I first cast Sucrose E, which do damage, then it provides 20% of Sucrose elemental mastery and 50 on top of that to my party member, for example Fischl's. And then supposedly my Fischl will trigger an elemental reaction, for example an Eletro-Charged here. She will be able to utilize the extra gain in elemental mastery to do more damage. Note that while it say 1300 on the Eletro-Charged damage here, not all of this is provided by the elemental mastery gain in Sucrose. For example, here without Sucrose, our Eletro-Charged is able to do 1022 damage. So that means that the benefit of Sucrose is the gain in 300 damage per Eletro-Charged. In other words, the total damage is the E damage itself plus the whatever gain on top using the elemental mastery on the reaction. For Electric-Charged type of reaction or overload type of reaction, we can estimate the benefit of Sucrose gain using this way. Starting off from 1, which is furthermore simplified to 2 and then 3 because of the property of multiplication. Starting off with Electric-Charged, for example, you have Tataria and Fischl triggering the reaction, and then your Sucrose and your traditional healer, which is a possible team. Let's assume you're fighting a single target, for example the boss from the last event. We can assume that you can trigger 8 Electric-Charged in 8 seconds, 1 per second for the time being. So once again, we have the upper bound where it's the good artifact damage, and we have the lower bound which is poor artifact damage. And then moving on, starting off with the x-axis going to the right, and once again that's trading traditional stat for elemental mastery, meaning that we again sacrifice potentially building attack percent or critical rate for elemental mastery instead. And of course the y-axis is our potential damage. Observing the graph, we see a couple of things again. Elemental mastery could see a slight increase in your damage if your artifact is really bad, but right here, even if you have average artifact, you are better off building regular stat than elemental mastery. And if you have really good artifact, well, Sucrose damage herself will outscale the reaction by a lot. Now I know a lot of you might ask, oh, what happens if it's not single target? What if you have a group of mob? In that case, unfortunately, it's pretty much similar because that your Sucrose E damage herself will also be able to hit multiple target. So the only difference is if your E cannot hit all the target, but somehow your reaction can hit every single target. In that case, the math might change, but in general, you can assume something like this. But what you can do to increase the number of Electro-Charged is to simply include another Electro character. Here we double the number of electric charge from 8 per 8 seconds to 16 per 8 seconds, which is 2 character proccing Eletro-Charged. You can see that in this graph, the graph mostly approached a upward trend direction, so as we build more EM, the more damage we'll be able to gain. Now, I want to make a quick call out that her burst scale actually are really well. So in terms of elemental mastery, her burst loses by a lot even when you have 2 characters that can trigger Electro. However, the problem with her burst is that it has a really high energy cost and you might not be able to cast this so often as your E. So when you factor in the fact that you can cast a lot more E than your burst, the graph looks something like this instead, where you can see that at maximum potential, a regular traditional stat would be better. However, for a most general purpose, elemental mastery would actually be able to catch up. The same concept pretty much applied to overload as well. Here you can see that assuming you can trigger 8 overload across 8 seconds, which is 1 overload per second. In terms of maximum potential, Sucrose herself damage will outscale the overload, but if we talk about like average or bad artifact, you can see that building EM can see a significant gain here. So for average purposes, elemental mastery is actually really good here. And of course, if you can trigger really consistent overload, again, if you're like 2 character, here you can see what happens if you trigger 16 overload across the 8 seconds, like 2 trigger. You can see like elemental may completely gonna grow like really fast and completely blow the traditional stat out of the water in terms of end game and maximum damage potential. Now, when it comes to Vaporize or Melts, a lot of you were very kind to link me to this video that did a comparison for his 900 Elemental Mastery Sucrose, and he is correct. In terms of Vaporize and Melt, Elemental Mastery can scale really well and you should build on Sucrose, but I figured that I'll explain the math behind it anyway. When it comes to Melts or Vaporize type of reaction, it works a bit differently than Electro, in the sense that it takes your original attack number into account and try to make that number bigger. And you make that already big number even more bigger, big enough to overcome the loss of damage on Sucrose herself. Going back to their video using it as example, here you can see that their Sucrose does really good damage on her Yi. She does about a 13k critical on her Yi. And their Xinyan is able to do 30k melt damage on their E. Now the first thing I want to call here is that 30k melt damage here is actually very big already. And so our goal here is to make this number even bigger, big enough to overcome the loss of the Sucrose damage. And that is precisely what their example did in here. Here they changed their Sucrose gear for 900 Elemental Mastery, and you can see the Sucrose damage dramatically decrease all the way to 5000. And you can see here, trading 900 Elemental Mastery, which is about like 250 to their party member, which is like a 1.5 increase in the melt. They're able to do 1.5 increase in damage on the melt, and so it does 45k damage instead. And the damage gain here is a lot more than the loss of damage from Sucrose, so in the end this results in more damage. And remember that the Elemental Mastery buff lasts for 8 seconds. For something like my Deluxe Shield Calm, where I can keep on hitting the enemy after for more Vaporize damage, it looks something like this. Here you can see that building Elemental Mastery on Sucrose dramatically increased the damage all the way, completely blowing out her own damage herself. If you're unsure why this is the case, this is because Elemental Mastery is too expensive. As we have discussed in previous video, electro type of reactions such as Overload or Electro-Charged were never too good and doesn't scale too well with Elemental Mastery to begin with. Now you might think, wait, why won't you do more damage with free Elemental Mastery provided by Sucrose? Well, what you have to understand that it's not free. It comes at the cost of Sucrose damage herself. By building Elemental Mastery, you're sacrificing the damage that Sucrose can potentially do using her ability. On top of that, the game actually takes an 80% cut on your Elemental Mastery, meaning that while Elemental Mastery were already expensive, they're making it even more expensive by taking a dramatic cut. Going back to the previous example from the other YouTuber, you can see that they traded approximately 9000 damage for 900 Elemental Mastery, which translates to about like say 200 to 250 Elemental Mastery when it finally get transferred to other character. For Vaporize type of reaction, that translates to about like saying making your Vaporize reaction 1.3 times bigger. And because of the rule of making big number even more bigger, you can easily overcome the loss of 9000 damage, which is what happened in the Deluxe Shield graph or in the original video that he showed it. And in terms of electric charge, you're approximately making a 1300 electric charge to something like a 2600 electric charge. So you're gaining effectively 1300 damage per electric charge at the cost of 9000 damage, right? And so you need to hit about like 8 or 9 electric charge in order to make it up, depending on it. Going back to the original question, is building Elemental Mastery on Sucrose worth or would I do it? I would say yes, but make sure that you're aware to put her in a team that can utilize Vaporize reaction or Melts reaction, or if you're going for Electro-Charged or Overload, make sure that you have 2 characters who can trigger that reaction. For example, in an Electro-Charged team, you'll do a Fischl Beidou. So, did Sucrose save Elemental Mastery? Maybe, but hey, at least if you're building those Elemental Mastery Anemo piece for your Venti, now you know where you can put them. If you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.